Hello friends and welcome to Smart Coach. In today's video we are going to talk about the Bhakti movement and Sufi movement. Okay, both of these movements took place in medieval India, and these movements were geared towards reformation of the existing important religions, two existing important religions of India, that is Hinduism and Islam. All right, and these movements, you see, they fed into each other. All right, so if Bhakti movement draws certain inspiration from Islam, Sufi movement also draws certain inspiration from Hinduism as it existed in India. Okay, and these movements are basically the result of the introduction of Islamic faith into the Indian subcontinent. However, that's one of the reasons. There are other reasons which can be traced back. There was always this reformative aspect to Hinduism. Okay, Hinduism and Hindu scriptures had always stressed upon the oneness of God, and also it had always stressed upon the proximity of the living human with God. However, with the coming of Islam, this movement it changed gears and it achieved more speed, and therefore what we see is the occurrence of the Bhakti and the Sufi movement during the medieval India. Okay, now let us proceed and let us see how it all came to be. All right, so if we discuss the causes for the Bhakti movement, all right, okay, and again, in the first part of this video, we'll be treating the Bhakti movement, and then in the second part, we will be treating the Sufi movement. Although both can be taught in the same breath, however, there are certain subtle differences which can be elaborated better when we talk about them separately. Now, moving forward, causes for the Bhakti and Sufi movement, we will treat them together. All right, so what we see is that after Islam was introduced in India, okay, it was violently introduced to to be precise, okay, because Islam came into India as a result of conquest, okay, and therefore it is only expected that Hinduism will shrink back a little bit and take stock. All right, and you see, Islam also had a concept of egalitarianism. Okay, although it is not to say that Hinduism is without the idea of egalitarianism, however, Islam was explicitly egalitarian, and therefore Hinduism, when it started to build its defenses against Islam, what would it do? It would challenge the egalitarian nature of the religion itself, okay, of Hindu religion itself, okay, and therefore caste system was more rigidified. Okay, therefore the caste system became more rigid after the introduction of Islam. Because of the threat from Islamic egalitarianism, it became more difficult for people to leave the Hinduistic fold. Okay, and therefore caste system became rigid. And we also see that there was a flowering, or we cannot call it a flowering because that would make it a positive connotation, but there was overabundance at this point of time of rituals and rites. Okay, all right, and that's to say that Hinduism itself, it shrank back, took stock, and tried to reform itself, but in a negative sense. That is, it tried to negate the egalitarian aspect of it. Then again, with the starting of the Sultanate Empire, what we see is that certain castes from among the Hindu society who had always occupied a lower rung in society, and who had consequently also occupied a lower rung, that is a lower bracket within the economy of India. Now these people became economically upwardly mobile. Okay, castes such as the manufacturing castes, okay, castes which were attached to manufacturing, all right, castes which were tied to the market, okay, castes which were not tied to agriculture, or the castes which were not the upper castes of society. They were not tied to agriculture, they were not tied to warfare, the system of warfare, or they were also not tied to the Brahmanical structure. Okay, these castes which belong to the manufacturing sector, okay, they became upwardly mobile with the establishment of the Sultanate Empire and the growth of a new form of economy. However, their upward mobility All right. However, that upward mobility within the economic structure was not replicated by an upward mobility in the religious structure or in the social structure. Okay, they became economically upwardly mobile. However, in the social structure, they still occupied a lower rung, and therefore there was a tendency among these castes to, you see, make themselves socially upwardly mobile. Okay. There was a tendency among these castes to make themselves socially upwardly mobile. And as we have all talked about, you see, these two, we have already talked about these two phenomena which are going on at that particular period of time, that is medieval India. As far as, you see, restrictions about castes are concerned, and as far as the persecution of castes are concerned, it has been going on in India for a long time, and therefore at this point of time we see that certain, you see, saints come about and they start criticizing the caste system. We see that they start not only criticizing the caste system, but they also start criticizing the Hindu concept of God itself. Okay, they start criticizing the concept of a god with attributes, that is a god which can take on an anthropomorphic attribute, that is which can take on human form, a god of reincarnations and incarnations. Okay, so these kind of ideas about God and the relationship between the god and his subject, okay, it came under criticism, and there was reformulation of these, you see, ancient conventions or ancient thoughts about God, all right, and how one is related to God. Should there be a middle person who can facilitate the relationship between a human and God, that is the Brahmans. Okay, should there be a Brahman, or should we believe in Brahmanistic structure? Okay, and therefore this Bhakti movement came about, and it started to revolutionize popular culture. It started to revolutionize not just popular culture but also popular religion. Okay, out of these questions, or out of these you see, restructurings of society, the Bhakti movement started a popular social restructuring. Okay, so that is very important to take stock of. It started a popular social restructuring out of these causes. Okay, similarly for the Sufi movement, what we will see is that the Sufi movement, it was a reaction against the aggrandizement of Islam itself, because Islam, it always stressed upon prudence, it always stressed upon austereness. However, with the coming out of Islam from Arabia, prudence and austereness, okay, these concepts became irrelevant, and Islam itself became an aggrandized and monarchical form of a religion which you see, which started providing legitimacy to these great empires, and these worldliness of Islam prompted certain Islamic saints. Okay, worldliness that had seeped into Islam, it prompted certain Islamic saints to question the doctrine of Islam and to question the doctrine of what Islam had become. Okay, and therefore we see the growth of the Sufi movement, and it readily found a home in India because of the social malleability of the structure, the social structure of India. Okay, because Indian social structure had always been very malleable. Okay, it had always been amiable to other religions, and therefore Sufism found a very ready home in India. And these Sufi saints, therefore, and their doctrine, therefore, you will see that they always value austereness, they always value otherworldliness, they value devotion and direct devotion to God without the need for an ulema. Okay, and ulema, which has become ulema, or that is the Sunni Orthodox Islamic, you see, higher caste. Okay, so ulema was challenged by the Sufi movement. Okay, all of these things came under criticism, and therefore these causes, they formed the background to the development of the Bhakti and the Sufi movement in India. All right, now moving on to Bhakti movement. All right. Now, if we take the Bhakti movement singly, the most important name that would come to mind, okay, is Ramananda. All right. He is the pioneer of Bhakti movement in India, because it is from Ramananda's philosophy that we see the Bhakti movement, you see, it progressed within India. Ramananda was born in present-day Prayag, which was Allahabad. Now again it has been named Prayag. He was born in present-day Prayag, and he preached the Bhakti philosophy. That is a philosophy which rejected, not outright, but which was critical of caste system. Okay, and the restrictions of caste. Okay, it was critical of those two things. And then Ramananda was also Ramananda also preached the oneness of God and the proximity or the closeness of the human to the God. Okay, so Ramananda is very important in that regard. Okay, the philosophy of Ramananda can be termed Advaita, okay, and from this philosophy itself, the Bhakti movement, it flowered within India. Now, the preachings of Ramananda not being explicit, okay, as far as caste and the nature of God is concerned, okay, preachings of Ramananda were not explicit on the nature of God and the caste system, or what should be one stand as far as the caste system is concerned. Therefore, out of this ambiguity within the preachings of Ramananda, what we see is that two types of bhakti saints or two types of bhakti philosophy came about, okay, and that is the Saguna and Nirguna. All right. Now, gun means attributes, okay, or gun means property. Sa means with, and nir matlab without. All right. So, with attributes and without attributes. All right. So, saguna and nirguna. Now, whose attributes are we talking about? We are talking about the attributes of God. Is God with attributes? Can God be seen? Can God be termed a male or a female? Can God be described? That's what Saguna means, okay, that God can be described, He can be seen, He can be male, female, He can be like a human, He can be like a boar, whatever you think His form is, okay. However, the Nirgunas, they did not believe in attributes, okay, no attributes and attributes. So, attributes out here is yes, out here is yes and out here is no, all right. So, out here attributes yes, out here attributes no, all right. So, no attributes and with attributes. And out of this, if one believes in the attributes of God, where do we find these attributes of God? Which are the principal texts where we find the attributes of God? We will find them in the Vedas, right? And we will find them in the scriptures, all right. So, the Sagunas also believed in the Vedas and the scriptures. However, the Nirgunas did not believe in the Vedas and the scriptures, all right. They did not. And if one believes in the Vedas and the scriptures, one cannot, you see, directly criticize the caste system also. It can talk about the restriction of caste system, but it cannot say that the caste system does not exist or it is completely invalid, okay. Therefore, certain elements of caste system, okay, it was accepted. Brahmanical form of society, it was also accepted. However, the Nirgunas did not accept this too, all right. So, you can see how logically it progresses, okay. The distinctions between Sagunas and Nirgunas, it progresses completely logically, okay. So, Saguna, they believe in the attributes of God. Nirgunas do not believe in attributes of God. They believe in the Vedas and scriptures. Nirgunas don't believe in that, and therefore, because of their belief in the Vedas and scriptures, they cannot be completely rejective. They cannot completely reject the caste system. However, the Nirgunas can, okay. They can be critical about the caste system, the Sagunas, okay. However, the Nirgunas completely reject the caste system, okay. So, now, proceeding forward from them, who are the important Nirguna saints? Let us look at the Nirguna saints first. The important Nirguna saints out here are Kabir, all right, very important. Then we have got Guru Nanak, all right, and we have also got Dadu Dayal, all right. All right. So, these are the important Nirguna saints, all right. They did not believe in the existing scriptures, they did not believe in the caste system, all right. They did not try to reform Hinduism. Although Kabir, one can say that he tried to reform Hinduism, he stressed upon importance of Hindu philosophy, okay. However, Nanak, you see, a person like Nanak did not try to reform Hinduism, he came up with a different religion itself, okay. So, going on from there, we will look into the philosophy and you see the thoughts about these Nirguna saints first, okay. Proceeding forward, first let us treat, okay, Kabir, all right. Very importantly, what you have to know about Kabir is that he was born in Benares, all right. He was born to a Hindu widow but was brought up by a Muslim weaver, and Kabir himself was a weaver, okay. and important you see students of Kabir or important disciples of Kabir and contemporaries of Kabir such as Ramdas. Okay, these were also Kabir himself was weaver. There were Ramdas, people like Ramdas who also belonged to the manufacturing, okay, manufacturing castes. Okay, there were cobblers, tanners, and metal workers also. Now, these illustrates the first point that I was trying to make, that all of these people, okay, they belong to the manufacturing classes, all right. The other disciples of Kabir, and there were various contemporaries, other saints of the Bhakti movement, okay, which who belong to the manufacturing classes, and these classes were trying to revive themselves socially, okay. So, now moving forward, Kabir is also known for writing poems, the Sakhis and Dohas, important writings of Kabir, and you can find the compilation of these writings in the Bijak. Alright, this is a compilation of the writings of Kabir, very important to remember. Alright, and then we have got Nanak. Okay. Now, the history of the development of the Sikh religion is very important because it has important connections with very pertinent connections with the Mughal Empire and the reigns of Jahangir, Shah Jahan, Aurangzeb. Okay, therefore, you see, talking about Nanak, we also have to know about the other Sikh gurus. Okay. As far as the philosophy of Kabir, Nanak and Dadu Dayal, as far as their philosophy is concerned, I have already talked about them. There are important events in the life of these people which one has to know, such as Nanak. He is also known for visiting Russia. He is also known, it is also said that he had met Akbar during his lifetime. And as far apart from Nanak himself, we also have to know about the other Sikh gurus, certain things about other Sikh gurus. There are important Sikh gurus such as Amar Das, okay, Ramdas, then Guru Gobind, Tegh Bahadur, Govind Singh, sorry, this is Guru Har Gobind, okay, Guru Har Gobind, Tegh Bahadur, Guru Gobind Singh. All right, so these are actually very important Sikh gurus, and they are important because of the fact that they are intimately connected with the Mughal Empire, and therefore we have seen in previous question papers, especially in NPSC, where great weightage is put on Bhakti and Sufi movement. Also, we have seen questions being asked about the importance of these Sikh gurus, okay, in connection with the Mughal Empire. Okay, so it is important to learn about them also. And then moving forward, we also have to look into Dadu Dayal, who taught in Rajasthan. Okay, all right. So as far as Dadu Dayal is concerned, his followers are also known as Dadu Panthis. All right. So these form, okay, the important Bhakti saints, and I have already talked about, it's not Ramdas, it's Raidas. Okay, I have already talked about Raidas also. These Kabir, Raidas, okay, Nanak, Dadu Dayal, all of these form important Bhakti saints. Okay, now moving forward from the Nirguna Bhakti saints, these are Nirguna Bhakti saints. We also have the Saguna Bhakti saints. Okay, now categorization is important. These are Nirgunas. They don't believe in caste. They don't believe in the nature of God as taught by Hinduism, and they were essentially not trying to reform Hinduism, but they were trying to completely challenge it. Okay, and then we move forward to the Bhakti saints who were trying to reform Hinduism. Now, important names here are Chaitanya, active in Bengal. Okay, Shankar Dev, on which a question was asked in NPSC. Okay, Shankar Dev was popular in Assam. Okay, and then we have got Mirabai. All right, who was in Rajasthan, popular in Rajasthan. All right, We have also got saints like Tulsidas, who you see rewrote the Ramcharitmanas. So it's very important, the Ramayana in the form of the Ramcharitmanas. It's very important to remember these names, okay, these names of important bhakti saints. Now moving forward, one pertinent point, or one exclusive point about the bhakti saints, both sagunas and nirgunas, we have to know about this point, and that is these bhakti saints popularized vernaculars. Now, since they were challenging the dominance of Brahmanical structure of society, they did not preach in the Brahmanic, language, that is Sanskrit language. Okay, they did not preach in Sanskrit language. However, they preached in the vernaculars. They preached in the vernaculars which are more accessible to the people whom they were preaching to. Okay, they talked in the way, in the same manner as the people they were preaching to. All right, they did not show themselves as higher ups in society, but they actually blended themselves with the people or disciples whom they were preaching to. Therefore, they were very instrumental in popularizing vernaculars. Now, when we talk about the books, or when we talk about the works of these bhakti saints, okay, when we talk about their philosophies, all of these were expounded in vernaculars. They were written down in vernaculars and compiled within vernacular text. Okay, this was to make their teachings and preachings more accessible, and this also served as a criticism or as a challenge to the Brahmanical structure, which relied upon Sanskrit to propagate their religion. All right, so that's a very important fact, or that's a very important aspect of bhakti movement, which must be kept in mind. Okay, and as we talked about the distinctions between the sagunas and nirgunas, this is one of the most important aspect which ties both of the sagunas and nirgunas together. Okay, they both, you see, taught and preached and you see, wrote in vernacular. So that's something we have to remember. Now moving forward, okay, we have to look at the other regions of India also, especially the southern part of India, and out there bhakti movement in Maharashtra is also very important. So important saints, okay, are Jnana Deva. All right, then we have got Eknath, we have got Tukaram, Ramdev, sorry, and we have also got Namdev. All right, so these are very important bhakti saints in southern portions of India. Tukaram, Eknath, Namdev, they prove instrumental in the idea of a Maratha Swarashtra. Okay, their preachings were very important in the formation of the Maratha nations or nation also. Tukaram, Eknath, Namdev, they were also, you see, they were also great influences upon the life of Shivaji. Shivaji, the person who brought the Marathas together and established the Maratha Saurashtra. Okay, so these bhakti saints are also very important. So they are also, it is also necessary for us to keep these bhakti saints from Maharashtra in mind. All right, so moving forward, in our next part we will talk about the Sufi movement. I hope we have satisfactorily cleared up the bhakti movement. Now we will go on and see what is the philosophy of the Sufis and how, you see, Sufism established itself in India.